So thank you so much, Bronwyn, and to all the team at the Buddhist Library for inviting me to give this talk on spiritual friendship. Just begin by acknowledging the land on which I'm speaking to you from tonight, and that's the Baramadugal land of the Darug Nation. I pay my respects to the Darug people who never ceded this land and who have been the custodians of this land for countless generations. So I pay my respects to those elders past, present, and emerging. And I'd just like to extend that respect to any First Nations people who are here tonight and First Nations people everywhere. And so I'm delighted to be talking about the theme of spiritual friendship. Spiritual friendship, as many of you know, has a central place in Buddhist thought, in Buddhist culture. It's something that I didn't really understand probably until I was in full swing in my Buddhist career. So I think early on in my spiritual development, I was very individual in my pursuit of Dhamma and individual in my practice. Didn't really see myself having a lot of spiritual friends, didn't really see myself as being part of a Buddhist community. And it wasn't until much later that I realized the importance of this and just how central it actually is to the Buddhist path, and started to have an appreciation for the reason spiritual friendship is encouraged, and also learned the depth of what it means to have spiritual friendship and the possibilities for having good companionship on the spiritual path. And so tonight, I'm going to be giving a little bit of an introduction to this theme, spiritual friendship. Then we're going to do a meditation on spiritual friendship. And after that, I'll give a Dharma talk about avoiding fools. And so I'll just begin sharing my screen, and do let me know if it kind of disappears or you can't see. So here we have very woolly, there's a lot of texture in this photo, but we have these people coming together in spiritual friendship. And there's a kind of sense here of diversity, lots of different colors, and a sense that these people are coming together. So maybe this is what spiritual friendship means. The word that we use to describe spiritual friendship comes from the Pali terms Kalyana Mitta. So Kalyana is a word that means beautiful, charming, good, auspicious, something that is useful and beneficial, helpful. And Mitta is the word for friend. And many of you know that the word metta, or what we might translate as love or loving kindness, is related to this word mitta. So it's friendliness. That's what metta is, and mitta is friend. It's often translated, this term Kalyana Mitta, as a spiritual friend, a good friend, a noble friend, a wise advisor. It's a compound word, so it actually has a different meaning in different contexts. We're going to explore some of those meanings in this session today and also next week. One of the ways I like to think about spiritual friendship has been inspired by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Bhikkhu Bodhi characterizes this term in two different ways. He says that there's a horizontal form of spiritual friendship, that's something on an equal level. This is the social aspect of Buddhism, coming together with friends to maybe share a meal or listen to a Dharma talk, doing what we're doing now, being spiritual companions. This is a very useful thing for us because it helps inspire and encourage us on the path. These are people who support us in practical ways. Maybe they'll give a lift to a retreat, or they'll be there if we're having a bad day. And this is very useful. So this is the kind of equality of spiritual friendship, this horizontal level. And then there's what Bhikkhu Bodhi calls the vertical, this asymmetrical form of friendship, which is having a good teacher, for example, like the Buddha or his disciples, encountering the Buddha in the suttas. This is the relationship of a teacher and student. And this form of friendship isn't just social. It isn't just of peers or people doing things together. This is a very different kind of friendship. So this is the kind of friendship that will allow us to come out of suffering. This is the kind of friendship which inspires us to practice well, instructs us in what qualities we need to develop and what qualities we need to abandon to become better people and to reach that ultimate goal of liberation. So this is a very different form of friendship. It's not an ordinary kind of friendship. It's not like our other friends we might go to the movies with or have dinner with. It's even not like those spiritual companions that we have. This is a very profound form of friendship. This is when that friendship is very beautiful. That friendship is very wise and is able to lead us from suffering and ignorance to wisdom and freedom. And so this is what is meant when we talk about spiritual friendship in that kind of lofty term, almost that transcendental level of spiritual friendship. And it doesn't diminish, of course, the importance of having just good, regular spiritual friends who we associate with on the path. Those friendships are also incredibly important. But maybe that's not what we mean when we're talking about Kalyana Mitta in the way that the Buddha talked about it. And so in this talk, we'll be exploring some of those horizontal levels of friendship. We'll be seeing how we relate to others, how they relate to us. And that social element is really important. Next week, we'll be looking more at that, I'm reluctant to use the word transcendental, but that vertical or that asymmetrical form of friendship, which is about liberation, the path that will help us get to liberation, the friend that will show the path to us. And so this week, we'll be looking at that more mundane, everyday kind of friendship, which is still really important. And many of you will be familiar with this, this very central teaching that is used over and over again. You see it everywhere. I used it in the description for this talk. It's that friendship is the whole of the spiritual path. And I think it's important for us to get to know this story, get to know this sutta in detail to understand just what the Buddha meant when he talked about spiritual friendship. So we're going to read together this short sutta, this short portion. And you see here at the top, it's called the Upada Sutta, which means half. And so the situation is this. Venerable Ananda is talking to the Buddha. And he says to the Buddha, "Sir, good friends, companions, and associates are half of the spiritual life." And you've got to feel a bit sorry for Ananda here. He probably thought that he was going to get praised by the Buddha. He thought he'd come up with something that was very profound and that the Buddha would find agreeable. But the Buddha says, "Not so, Ananda, not so. Good friends, companions, and associates are the whole of the spiritual life." So not half, but the whole. Why is this so? A mendicant, that means a monk. So here the Buddha is talking to Ananda, who's a monk, and referring to companionship in the monastic path. He says, a mendicant with good friends, companions, and associates can expect to develop and cultivate the noble eightfold path. So this is very different from just going out for an ice cream or sharing an avocado toast or going for a walk on the beach. This is about developing the noble eightfold path. It's when a mendicant develops right view, which relies upon seclusion, fading away in cessation, and ripens as letting go. So if you've just joined this session, make sure your microphone is muted so that we can hear me. And so this is the first step of the Eightfold Noble Path. And this is true of the rest of the path, which includes right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right immersion or samadhi. And this is what the Buddha talked about. This is the goal of spiritual friendship, the perfection of the Eightfold Noble Path. And this is the path that leads out of suffering to liberation. And the Buddha says another thing here. Here's another way to understand how good friends are the whole of the spiritual life. By relying on me, the Buddha says, as a good friend, sentient beings who are liable to rebirth, old age and death, to sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress are freed from all these things. And so here, this very famous phrase of spiritual friendship being the whole of the spiritual life is shown to its perfection, shown in its highest possible form. So you might hear people saying from time to time, oh yes, spiritual friendship is the whole of the spiritual path. And you might think, oh, this is just what it means to have companions on the path. But here we can see from the context that this sutta presents this term from the Buddha, we see the profundity of meaning to spiritual friendship and just how important it is for liberation. And so this is what we're going to use for our meditation subject. Some of you might know of this term, the anussitis. The anussitis means recollections. And these are ways that we can review a concept or theme in our practice. We can ponder it in our minds. We work with our busy thinking mind and we turn it over and over again, thinking about a particular topic that can inspire our mind and deepen our understanding of the Dhamma. So the anussitis are recollections that bring gladness, joy into our hearts, that help us develop deeper meditation states, that help us feel like the Dhamma is immersed in our heart and leads to wisdom. And one of these, mentioned in the Nandya Sutta, which is in the Anguttara Nikaya 11.12, the Nandya Sutta, we find this recollection on spiritual friendship. And so spiritual friendship is a way that we can have gratitude for our teachers and friends on the path, and a way that we can inspire our mind. We can be so happy that we have good friends to instruct us in what is good. Good friends who are kind and wise, who are compassionate and want the very best for us. These are the type of friends that will help us develop our minds and will lead us to the end of the spiritual path, to liberation. And so this is what we're going to do for the next 20 minutes. We're going to do a contemplation on spiritual friendship. Please take a few moments to set up your meditation posture. Make sure that you're comfortable. Here we are, surrounded by spiritual friends. How wonderful, even online, we can connect with dear companions on this spiritual path. And so closing your eyes, relaxing your body will begin by letting go. Letting go of the day or the busyness. Letting go of the past. Just feeling the body here in this space now. Here. Letting go of the future, not worrying or thinking or planning. Leaving the past in the past and the future in the future. We can be here now. We can let go. We can be present, aware, and relaxed. And so just spend a few moments relaxing the body, allowing your body to arrive, allowing it to feel good, calming the body down, softening all that tension and tightness, releasing all that stuff we store in the body, letting go, relaxing. So just scanning the body from the top of the head all the way down to the toes, softening, relaxing, releasing for the next few minutes. Feels so good to relax the body. Feels so good to let go of tightness, tension. And you notice that when the body is relaxed, the mind all by itself becomes more calm, more peaceful. Though thoughts may come and go, practice this letting go, reminding ourselves there's nothing to do, nowhere to go, just being here now, relax, calm, and peaceful. And we'll use this calm, quiet mind to begin our recollection of spiritual friendship. How lucky I am to have spiritual friends. How fortunate, how wonderful. Everything I have learned has been taught to me by others. Every drop of Dharma I have learned from spiritual friends. They have taught me out of kindness and compassion. Knowing this, I am so grateful to all my spiritual friends, my companions on this path. Thinking now of a spiritual friend, someone who taught you some Dhamma, maybe a teacher, maybe the author of a book that inspired you. It could be someone who encouraged you to attend a Dhamma talk or got you along to your first retreat. Could be someone who you meet regularly at Dhamma talks, or you see online, chat with in Buddhist forums. Someone you meditate with. You're surrounded by good spiritual friends who encourage and support us on our path. How wonderful. How lucky. Allow this gratitude to take root in your heart. They were so kind. So compassionate to encourage my practice. And allow this gratitude to transform to gladness, happiness, joy. Allow yourself a little smile. How fortunate, how lucky to be surrounded by such good spiritual friends. Perhaps you remember a teacher who shared some wisdom that helped you, someone who showed you right from wrong, someone who supported your practice, encouraged you to meditate, someone who has been there for you. How fortunate, how very fortunate to have such friends as this. Kind, compassionate friends. Wise, supportive friends. Warm heart, loving friends. Care for us. Care deeply for us. And rejoice in our good qualities. Only wish the best for us. And perhaps there's a feeling in your heart of warmth, of support, of borrowed strength. That feeling of warmth, love, compassion. And we can find joy in this feeling of warmth, happiness to have such good friends. And as we come towards the end of this short session, take a few moments to review. How did it feel to contemplate spiritual friendship? Could you see that all you have learned is due to spiritual friends? Did you develop a feeling of gratitude? Was there some joy in your heart? Did you remember something you learned, something someone had done or taught? How did that feel for you? And having contemplated spiritual friendship, we can dedicate the merit of our practice, being a good friend to others, sharing our goodness with all living beings, thinking, may all beings meet good spiritual friends. May I be a good spiritual friend to others. May I liberate my own mind and help others to become free. So this is a short contemplation on spiritual friendship. So I hope that you enjoyed that. It's not often that we think about these things, but it is actually a really beautiful way to practice. It connects us with our teachers from the past and present and reminds us of our interconnectedness and the conditional nature of our learning, thinking even of how kind and compassionate it was that the Buddha became a spiritual friend and taught others and showed the path to the ending of suffering. And so the Buddha, of course, is our number one Kalyana Mitta. So thank you for sharing that contemplation together. We're going to move on from the heady heights of the Buddha's kindness and generosity and move slightly down the spiritual spectrum, I guess. And we're going to start our learning on part 1, avoiding fools. So this is a picture I borrowed from the internet, which is of a bunch of men who are egging their poor friends on. I don't know if you've got any friends like this in your life. Inside those helmets is a big hairy spider. And these poor men are tied up to the chair and they're trying to blow this spider at each other. So this is a kind of friendship, believe it or not. I don't want to condemn this, but I just want to start the discussion here by thinking about the diverse nature of our friendships, the many possibilities that our friendships can have, and wonder why the Buddha encouraged us to choose our friends carefully. So we're going to be looking at the reasons for this in the next few minutes. One of the classic lines from the suttas about friendship and fools is the lines from the beginning of the Mangala Sutta, Asewana Chabalanang Panditanang Chasewana, not to fraternize with fools, but to fraternize with the wise. This is the highest blessings. So avoiding fools was considered a blessing, just as association with the wise is a blessing, so too avoiding fools. And I think probably all of us, we can agree with this, right? I mean, people are very challenging. People are difficult. There's a lot of irritating, annoying, painful, inept, clumsy people out there that we encounter every day in our workplaces, in our homes, and on the streets, on public transport. If only we could magic them away, maybe then the world would be perfect, right? I don't know about that, but it would definitely make things easier to practice. Because coarse people, foolish people, difficult people, bad people, evil friends, frenemies, these types of people actually can be challenges to our spiritual practice. It's easy to say, oh, we should be like this and like that. We should have perfect compassion, perfect loving kindness. But the reality is sometimes it's quite difficult for us to have those very lofty states of mind. And if we're not careful, and we don't have a strong foundation, we don't have a strong mind and a developed mind, then we can be easily overwhelmed by such people. And there's a reason that the Buddha said it's okay to avoid fools. It's a blessing. And that is because we actually need to choose our associates well. And we'll find out why in the next few slides. So it's the highest blessing. And for me, I actually take a lot of comfort from these two extremes that the Buddha points to in his teachings, that there is a category of fools and there is a category of wise. And if we're going to have to choose one of these paths, then hopefully we'll choose the one which leads to wisdom and not the one that leads to foolishness. And I think it's probably a little bit basic just to stick to these extremes. I think there's parts of us, whether we like to admit it or not, that are foolish, and there's parts of us that are wise. The whole spiritual path that the Buddha taught encourages us to come out of unskillful, unwholesome behavior and to cultivate wholesome, skillful behavior. So in a way, you could see this whole spiritual path as a way of letting go of our foolish qualities and cultivating wise qualities. And it's the same with our friendships. We want to abandon friendships that don't serve us, that cause us trouble, that cause us pain and suffering, and cultivate friendships that are wholesome and lead us to better states, more wise states. So in the Buddhist texts, there's quite a lot of undesirable associates that we meet. There's bala, a fool or an ignorant person. We have the mogha purisa, a stupid or useless person. Wow, is this Buddhism? We have the mita patirupaka, a fake friend who we'll meet in a little bit. And we also have the papamitataya, a bad friend, or someone like a frenemy. And we also have the papasaka, a wicked friend, an evil friend. So I think it's useful that we have this terminology that we encounter in the suttas, because sometimes when we're in spiritual circles, we might put our love goggles or our compassion goggles on, and we might think that we're being really spiritual and that we're being really enlightened. But actually, having discernment, having wisdom is a quality that we should encourage. And having wisdom and discernment in our associations is also something that the Buddha encouraged. How do we know a fool? The Buddha says a fool is characterized by their deeds. And so this is comforting too, isn't it? Because it means that we're not inherently a foolish person, or that another person isn't inherently a fool. It's the actions that they do that make someone a fool. Just as an astute person is characterized by their deeds. And here the Buddha says wisdom is what makes behavior beautiful. So discernment is that wisdom faculty, knowing the difference between right and wrong, knowing the difference between a good friend and a bad friend. And here the Buddha says we can see a fool, we can know a fool by three things. And that is by bad conduct, by way of body, speech, and mind. So this is how we can recognize a fool, both in ourselves and also in others, the kinds of behavior they do. And so the Buddha says that we should train like this. We will reject those three things, that bad behavior in body, speech, and mind, by which a fool is known. And we will undertake to follow the three things by which an astute person is known. So that is, of course, developing wise behavior of body, speech, and mind. So perhaps the first fool that we'll encounter is ourself on the spiritual path, and seeing ourselves as someone who is a little foolish is quite useful, actually, because it gives us a bit of humility, stops us from being spiritually smug, thinking that we're better than other people, having a conceit of superiority. Instead, we should recognize that we too have these foolish qualities that we're trying to work on. This allows us to at least not be too judgmental of others, to keep that judgment in check, to have some compassion that is necessary to understand, these people behave like this for conditioned reasons, just as I too have these aspects of myself that I'm working on to try to abandon. So in this talk, please don't take this as kind of like we have to just jettison all of our friends from our lives. Be very careful. You might find yourself jettisoned if people had that kind of attitude. So no, we're still compassionate, still kind, but developing wisdom, developing discernment. And so some ways that we can think about this not association with fools is given in the sutta called the Bhaya Sutta. And the Buddha here says that whatever dangers there are in the world, these all come from foolish people, not from the wise. Whatever perils there are in the world, this comes from the foolish, not from the wise. And whatever hazards there are in the world, this comes from the foolish, not from the wise. Dangers, perils, hazards, these are things that come from foolish people. These are things that will get us in trouble if we associate with people who are dangerous, who are perilous, or who are hazardous. He gives a wonderful simile of a fire that spreads from a hut made of reeds and grass, burns down that bungalow, even if it's been well plastered in and out, draft-free, with latches fastened and windows shuttered. So this sounds to me like the kind of fireproofing that might have been available 2,500 years ago, plastered, latches, shuttered. Even then, this fire is able to get inside and burn down that house. So in the same way, if we're not careful, our own good qualities can be stolen away by this kind of fire of bad friendship. In another sutta, the Sukhapatana Sutta, which you'll find in the Itivuttaka, the Buddha says, whatever kind of friend you make, with whom you associate, that's how you become. So this is how it is when you share your life with people. Your associations rub off on you. The company you keep defines you. So he gives some good similes here too. The first one is of a poisoned arrow. And this arrow smeared with poison contaminates the quiver. A wise one, fearing contamination, would never have wicked friends. So that arrow tip will contaminate the container. And so I guess if it contaminates the container, you'd touch it and you'd become sick from that poison. Or, he says, it's like a rotten fish in a blade of grass. It makes the grass stink. And so it is when associating with fools. Again, it's that wrapping that gets contaminated with the smell. And instead, the Buddha says, we should be like sandalwood incense, wrapped up in leaves. The leaves are fragrant from that sandalwood. And so this is how it is when associating with the wise. So these images are very potent, very powerful. And the Buddha says, acknowledging that the container will get contaminated by those fragrances or by that poison, then we should avoid foolish people. And when I first read this sutta many years ago, I was kind of like, this just doesn't sound very Buddhist to me. We have this idea that we have to be so kind and compassionate and a good spiritual friend to everyone. Then why do we have these suttas which explicitly state, avoid people who are bad for you? It sounds kind of parental, right? It sounds like your parents when you're a teenager saying, oh, I don't like you hanging out with that kid. They saw the danger, they saw the drawbacks, and they saw how people are conditioned by our associations. And I remember for me personally, it took probably a long time for me to work out what a good friend is. Many of us will accept forms of friendship that aren't very wholesome, that aren't very conducive to feeling good about yourself and also behaving well. And I know so many people who have gotten in with bad crowds, as they say, and they end up doing things that they regret. They end up getting into trouble, they end up getting used or hurt, they end up in all sorts of situations that perhaps if they were wise, they could have avoided. And this is the kind of thing that the Buddha is pointing to. And again, I just want to restate, doesn't mean we just cut people out of our life completely. We need to have wisdom when associating with these people. And of course, we need to bring that wisdom to these friendships as well in skillful ways that look after ourselves without harming others. We still care about people around us. We still care about those people in our lives, but we need to have some wisdom in how we associate with them. And perhaps the most well-known sutta about friendship is the Sigalovada or the Sigala Sutta, which is in the Digha Nikaya 31. And this sutta introduces all sorts of ways that lay people especially can work out how to live a good life. The Buddha outlines in exquisite detail things to avoid and things to cultivate. And one of those areas is friendship. And so here we see the Buddha saying you should recognize these 4 enemies disguised as friends. So people we might think of as friends who in actual fact are bad for us. First one is the taker. Second one is the talker. Third one is the flatterer. And the last one is the spender. So we'll look at these friends in detail. So here we have an image of a jar with Jane. Jane's putting her name on the jar, I think, or maybe someone's taking Jane's name off. I don't know if you've got that kind of office environment where you can't put your food in the fridge without having to label it first in case someone takes it. I think that's what's happening here. Of course, this is the taker. Taker is a friend that we can recognize by these 4 qualities. Your possessions end up theirs. So if you have friends like this who take your possessions, this is someone who is a taker. Maybe they've got several of your books. I had friends like this who always would borrow a book and never give it back, or maybe they've borrowed a jacket or something, and your possessions have ended up theirs. They've asked for your stuff and you've given it and you never get it back. So this is someone the Buddha says that we should avoid. Someone who gives little but expects a lot. I read something the other day about someone who would always go out to dinner with a friend and they would never help to pay out with the bill. They would always just expect their friend to pay for them. This is someone who does their duty of a friend out of fear. They're worried about losing out. They're behaving in a way that means they don't want to miss out on the things that your friendship offers, but they do it because of self-interest, not out of care or compassion. So that's someone to avoid. And they associate you for their own advantage. So they're not with you for wholesome reasons. They're with you for nefarious reasons that only benefit them. So this is a taker. And so one thing I just want to note at this stage is just how particular the Buddha is being here, the level of detail that he's going into. It's very helpful to have these kinds of guidelines. And he obviously saw the danger in these kind of people in our lives. Maybe you do too. Certainly, this kind of behavior builds up a lot of resentment and is an unequal friendship. Next friend, or enemy in disguise, is the talker. This is someone who is always hospitable in the past. Oh, if only you were here last week, we had this beautiful food that we could have given you. It's always in the past, their hospitality, their generosity. Or they're hospitable in the future. Oh, next time you come, we'll give you a lovely meal. But in the moment, in the present, they just make these noises of pleasantries, kind of like, oh, yes, yes, of course, we'll do this for you. Oh, yes, I'd love to do that for you. But they never do. They're just the talker. And when there's something that has to happen now, they point to their own misfortune. Oh, I wish I could do this for you, but unfortunately, I can't at the moment. I've got this problem. Oh, I'd love to take you, but my car's in the shop. Or, oh, I'd love to give you that, but I just can't right now. So this is someone who talks. This is the kind of talker. Someone the Buddha says that we should avoid. And of course, for all of these, I'm not going into it this week, but I will go into it next week. All of these have a wise friend, a good friend, which is the opposite of this. And so you can imagine the opposite. We'll get to that next week. But there are different types of friends, and that's important to recognize. There are people who don't talk, they do. And people who don't take, they give. So who would you rather associate with? I guess that's what the Buddha is pointing out here. The next person is someone who is a flatterer. And you can recognize a flatterer because they support you equally in doing bad things and in doing good things. So this is an important one to recognize. A good friend wouldn't support us to do bad things. Sure, a good friend will support us to do good things, but a person who isn't a good friend for us won't restrain our behavior when it needs to be restrained. They'll encourage us to do things that will be harmful for us and harmful for others. So that's why this person is a flatterer. They don't want to tell us the truth. A good friend will always tell us the truth and let us know when we're being harmful. So this flatterer will praise us to our face, but put you down behind your back. So this is a duplicitous friend, someone who actually doesn't care for you in a wholesome way, someone who is backbiting and critical of you, someone you can't trust. So that's not a good friend, is it? And the last one is, I don't know if this will be a bit controversial for some of you. Maybe, I don't know, maybe is this how you like to spend your weekends? Perhaps. I don't want to judge, but here's what the Buddha had to say. You can recognize a fake friend who's a spender on these 4 grounds. They accompany you when drinking and roaming the streets at night, frequenting festivals and gambling. So this kind of person is an enabler, someone who will be like a drinking buddy, a gambling buddy. Actually, this is the kind of person who you probably encountered in your own life. They don't want to drink alone, they don't want to gamble alone, so they encourage you to come along and get into all sorts of trouble. I don't think this means we can't have fun. It doesn't mean we can't go to the occasional festival or something. I think probably the Buddha here is just highlighting the quality of the actions we engage in those places, and that it might lead to harm for ourselves and others. And so these are 4 very useful categories of person we can understand in very everyday terms, very practical ways. And probably when we encounter these people in our lives, we will detect a feeling that comes along with being with them. We might feel that we're being taken advantage of. We might feel that this person is going to lead us into trouble. We might have this niggling feeling in the back of our mind that this is not perhaps an entirely wholesome friendship. And so these categories, I suppose, are just markers, indicators. It doesn't mean that that person won't necessarily have other good qualities. And we, of course, want to encourage those good qualities in them. In the same way, however, we need to recognize that our good qualities are actually encouraged when we associate with good people, when we associate with wholesome people who have our best interests at heart, who are kind and generous, who demonstrate wholesome, skillful, beneficial behavior that benefits us, benefits others, and also benefits themselves. So it's good for us to associate with people like that because we can learn from and emulate those people. We are like the monkeys. Monkey see, monkey do. We're being trained all the time. We're being conditioned all the time by our interactions. And you can see it in things like social groups where we have people who have perhaps been together as friends from high school, and you see over time the quality of friendships will either develop in a wholesome way or become stuck, or maybe can end up being bitchy, gossipy, devoid of meaning. And yet we get stuck in these relationships, or you could see it in like an office place, a workplace, where there's a toxic environment because it's really competitive and people are out to get ahead and they don't care about you. So we can see these kind of relationships like that. And at some stage, we need to assess our interactions. We've only got limited time in life. So how do we want to engage with others? And what are the dangers for us in doing certain types of behavior? And so when we talk about spiritual friendship, it's an invitation for us to reflect upon the quality of our interactions. Are my interactions wholesome? Are they beneficial to me? Are they beneficial to my friends? And we can recognize a difference in various forms of friendship. And one of the things I love about being friends with Buddhist people in the communities that I am in is that they tend to be quite good people. They tend to have lots of good qualities. Sure, myself and others also have bad qualities, but we tend to find people wanting to be good, who are cultivating goodness and wholesomeness in their hearts. They're trying. They're not just coasting along. They're not going backwards. They're trying to move forward. They're trying to be a better person. And they're doing this because they've been taught by other spiritual friends, these are the qualities that you can develop. Wholesome qualities of body, speech, and mind. Generosity, ethical conduct. These are things that we can develop. And by following people who are good spiritual friends, we ourselves start to develop those good qualities, just like that leaf that is wrapping that sandalwood incense. We take on the aroma of that good friend. They perfume us. And so this is what's very beautiful and something that I've seen for myself on the Buddhist path, and I think probably all of you here have too, that we learn about goodness from others, and it feels good to emulate that goodness in our own lives. So how did the Buddha handle fools? So he's told us who to avoid. How did he himself handle fools? So here we have a depiction of the mass murderer Angulimala chasing down the Buddha. And the story goes that, of course, he wanted to kill the Buddha, but the Buddha used his psychic powers to move ahead and to always be a few steps ahead of Angulimala. And of course, in this image here, we have the Buddha looking very serene, magical, walking on a lotus leaf, a lotus flower rather, with an aura surrounding his head. And this, of course, is the aim that we're all working towards. But I don't know how you are. I don't know if you are floating around on lotus flowers and able to use your psychic powers to evade fools and bad people. So this is a kind of a lofty description of the Buddha, but he also had very simple and practical ways of handling fools. And that's what I want to look at now, because we can learn from these in our own life. He didn't have this quality of being like a doormat. The Buddha didn't let people just walk all over him. The Buddha had boundaries, strong boundaries, and he made these very clear. And this is important for us to recognize, because sometimes we think that we can't have strong boundaries if we're a Buddhist. If we're a spiritual person, we can't have limits. We have to be 100% spiritual perfection all the time. And of course, this is very difficult to achieve, and it might not necessarily be wise for us or for the people we interact with. The Buddha used boundaries constantly, and the Buddha didn't let fools take advantage of him. There's a stock phrase we encounter in the suttas all the time where he rebukes someone who has behaved in a foolish manner or who has a foolish view. Perhaps they misunderstand his teaching or willfully misrepresent him, or maybe they do an action or behavior that is not wholesome or skillful. And the Buddha rebukes them, saying, "Foolish men, or foolish man, or foolish woman, or foolish person, how can you do this?" And especially when he's talking to people who are on the spiritual path, like monks and nuns, he says, your behavior will affect people's confidence. And this is one of the main reasons that we need to make sure that we're not behaving in foolish ways ourselves, but also that, especially for the monastic sangha, for any spiritual group, that we're not associating with people who will bring the name of our spiritual tradition down, or that we associate with people who are hypocrites or who are abusers or who misrepresent the Buddhist teachings and make fools out of Buddhists in that way. We need to make sure that we are not by association being tarnished by people who are acting in foolish ways. And by this, I mean things like avoiding teachers who are corrupt, or avoiding groups known to be engaging in cult-like activities or behaviors, or people who have been known to be abusers. And this, of course, it's up to us to make sure that we avoid these people, because otherwise we become a target for developing a bad reputation because we associate with people who are bad or foolish. And here we have the words good vibes only, which if I get time, I'll come back to a bit later. So this is the idea that, you know, you have to be 100% positive and happy and joyful all the time, just the good vibes, none of the bad stuff. Is this how the Buddha was about people that he interacted with? There's a famous story where the Buddha was at a place called Chatuma, and there is this dreadful racket because there's these young monks who have been coming along talking and making noise after their meal. They're clanking their bowls and chattering, he says, like fisher folk. And so this is probably not the kind of meditative environment you thought that the Buddha might be wanting for himself at that time, all those thousands of years ago. And it's the same even today. You know, you go to a temple or a retreat center and people can behave in really outlandish, really noisy ways. And it's not conducive to meditation. And so the Buddha says, what are you doing, you people, making all this noise? Just like fisher folk hauling in a catch. Go away. I dismiss you. You are not to stay in my presence. So that is a very strong boundary. Go away. Leave me. This isn't just the Buddha saying, okay, just give it to me, I'll take it, I'll take it, I'll take it. There's a time for this kind of boundary. There's a time for this kind of filter that we want to put on our spiritual development, our spiritual places, or our relationships. It's okay to say no. It's okay to say this isn't appropriate. It's okay to say, please leave me alone. And so that's an interesting thing that perhaps we can learn from the Buddha. It wasn't always this kind of idealized, uber spiritual kind of love, light, compassion flowing out. It was practical. It was useful. It was sensible, the way that the Buddha interacted with other people. So he actually did something about this. You know, he didn't just send thoughts and prayers to people, but he made actions. And we see this in the next story, which is about a novice monk who was very bad and had a wrong view. And the Buddha said the Sangha should expel that novice. How is he expelled? From today, Kantaka, you may not refer to the Buddha as your teacher. Go away. Get lost with you. That's how Bhante Sujata translates it. Bhante Brahmali, a bit more soft. Go away with you. But this is important, that there are limits. Even within the Sangha, there are limits to how we can have these interactions with others. If we have people around us all the time who are foolish or corrupt, or who are difficult people, annoying people, then it's very difficult for us to have peace. Sure, in an ideal world, we'll have the kind of minds that are strong and powerful and can handle these people. But even the Buddha himself had limits. One of the analogies that's often given in monasteries is this analogy of that we all come together, we're all pebbles, and we get put into the pebble washer, the pebble polisher. So they put them in this barrel and they kind of turn the barrel and it polishes the pebbles. They rub against each other and they make each other smooth. And this is how you polish the pebbles. So this is an image that many teachers, including my own teachers, have given. And then one person once said to me, but rocks, they have different strengths. They have different qualities. Some rocks are very hard. Some rocks are very soft. And if you put those hard and soft rocks together, those hard rocks are going to pulverize those soft rocks. And so this is, again, it's kind of a wisdom here. Oh, yeah, actually, if we want to develop certain qualities, then we need to make sure that those qualities aren't being overwhelmed by unwholesome qualities from others, unskillful behavior from others, corrupt or misleading or untruthful or deceptive behaviors from others, because this will affect our mind. Bronwyn's told me that we're almost at the end of the session, so I'm just going to fast forward, do a bit of clicking. You can come back to that on the video. But this image, I think, is useful to understand that compassion for the viper will also get you bitten. So it's just the meme I took from the internet. But I think this kind of sums up a little bit of what we're talking about. Of course, we also want to have compassion and kindness towards other people, but we have to recognize that there is a danger with associating with certain people. And the last thing I wanted to get to today, and we'll do this and then we'll wrap up and we can have some time for some questions, is this idea of spiritual bypassing in friendships, which is something that I talk about a lot, spiritual bypassing. Perhaps this could be considered as when we're not being good friends to ourselves and we're allowing other people to be bad friends towards us. And I'll just quickly go through 4 aspects here, which is having weak boundaries. So I mentioned that before. Having overly tolerant or blind compassion, this concept of toxic positivity, and also this phobia of conflict. So weak boundaries is perhaps an important one for us to consider. It took me a long time to work out that I was allowed to have boundaries as a spiritual person. I always felt really guilty that I should be just open to everyone and that I should dissolve the boundaries between me and others. And so I think this is something for us to watch out for as spiritual people, because that just leaves the floodgates open to getting used, getting taken advantage of. It leads to things like abusive situations in religious groups or in homes and families or friendships where you get taken advantage of. And this can often be about your own needs to be liked and to be wanted and to be useful. But it can lead to really harmful situations. We do need to develop boundaries, and other people also need to have boundaries as well. We need to be careful of that blind compassion where we just indiscriminately allow types of behavior that shouldn't be allowed. And we, instead of calling out that bad behavior or challenging the kinds of behavior or saying this behavior is problematic, in spiritual circles, sometimes we're taught, just have compassion, turn the other cheek. And this can allow for things such as harmful relationships to occur, abusive patterns of behavior, where we're put into a situation where we feel like someone else's needs are more important than our own. And sometimes if we have compassion for others but not for ourselves, in this kind of form of blind compassion where we just allow people to get away with things, it's bad for us and it's also bad for them. And so compassion is good, compassion is fine, but it should be compassion informed by wisdom. And it's okay to say, this behavior is not appropriate, this is not acceptable. It's okay to say, this person is harming. And of course we want to have compassion, but not in a way that means that we don't, not in a way that allows for us to bypass those serious concerns that we might have. We need to watch out for that toxic positivity, which is that idea that, you know, we have to be 100% happy all the time, and that if we're having a bad day, we're not spiritual, or that if people have difficulties in their lives, that it's really low vibe, and we only want the happy vibes. This, of course, is a difficult thing to manage in our own minds, to be happy all the time, but it's not something we should expect for others. And if we're having a hard time, our friends should be understanding. We shouldn't have to subsume those parts of ourselves that are challenging or difficult because of an idea about what it means to be spiritual. So as Buddhists, we have to watch out for that spiritual bypassing, where we cover up our true, genuine feelings, or we try to disguise or minimize suffering in other people's lives. When people are going through a hard time, we have to recognize they're going through a hard time, not say things like, oh, it doesn't really matter, or like nothing is real. Sorry about that. I ran out of internet. I'll just finish up very quickly. I know that it's almost time, and that last thing is the idea of conflict and anger phobia. So sometimes as spiritual people, we might think that we can't have conflict in our lives, or that other people shouldn't have conflict with us. And that if we get angry or something like this, then we're not spiritual enough. We're not being a spiritual person. But the Buddha wasn't afraid of conflict. And by conflict, I mean talking about things that are bothering you, or pointing out people's behavior being harmful or affecting others. And we shouldn't be worried about having this healthy conflict in our relationships. And so in these ways, these ways of spiritual bypassing, we aren't being a good friend to ourselves. We're not being true and authentic. We might think that we're being really spiritual people by doing these sorts of behavior, but it is actually turning us into a bit of a fool. We're not developing the kind of skills or qualities that are going to help us and help others around us on the spiritual path. And also, if we encounter people doing this towards us, we should recognize this as spiritual bypassing. This is people being spiritually smug and feeling superior because they think that they're more spiritual when they engage in these kinds of behavior. This is actually the mark of a fool. And so that's the first part of this two-part series on spiritual friendship, how to avoid fools and how to not be a fool yourself. And I hope you can join me next week for the second part, where we look at that vertical form of spiritual friendship, the kind of friendship that can lift us out of suffering and propel us along the spiritual path all the way to enlightenment.